The Despicable Me franchise is so good that Illumination has already confirmed that Minions 3 is in production. But do you have any idea what the next movie about the yellow creatures will be about? We investigated and found out everything that could happen in this next incredible movie featuring Gru and his minions. Minions and Gru. It's practically impossible to think of Minions without thinking of Gru and vice versa. After all, this team has been working together for years, ever since the yellow creatures saw how the little boy froze Scarlet and stole the crown she had taken. However, at the end of Minions 2, we see that Gru's team has gotten even bigger since Dr. Nefario was convinced by those please faces that the boy and his minions make. We see that the scientist ends up taking off in the same aircraft we see Gru using in the first Despicable Me movie. Besides the Doctor, we can't forget Knuckles, who helped save Gru and also develop feelings for him, kind of taking on the role of a mentor and father figure that he never had, since his parents separated when he and Drew were just babies. So we're pretty sure Minions 3 will probably start where Minions 2 ended, showing this newly formed team committing new villainies and crimes, with Knuckles guiding Gru on how to choose his targets and giving tips on how not to get caught by the AVL. And on one of these missions to commit a crime, they will end up encountering another supervillain who is an old acquaintance of the former leader of the Vicious Six. And, if you remember well, Gru's mentor is much older than all the other members of the team of supervillains, indicating that he is from another generation. But this new supervillain, who will appear in Minions 3, would be both a rival and an old flame from Knuckles' school days, and she would interfere with Gru's operation. When the mentor explains to the leader of the Minions who this villainess is, they will discover that she currently works as a teacher at LPB, the same school for supervillains that we know from Despicable Me 4. Additionally, Knuckles would say that he couldn't graduate because he got expelled from school due to something his beloved did, and he took the blame. And that's where the story of Minions 3 begins to unfold.
Okay, alright, I get it.
School for Supervillains. After discovering LPB, Gru, who had never heard of the institution, starts wanting to study there and tells Knuckles. However, the mentor mentions to Gru that all the great villains in history, the most famous and biggest criminals, joined forces and created the High Council of Villains and founded the institution centuries ago. He also says that to enter the school, there are some requirements, such as being sponsored by a member of the High Council of Villains. And the other option would be to be invited to participate in a selection process that consists of a competition with several other candidates who also want to join the school for villains. But to do this, you need to receive an invitation from the institution itself, and now that they know Gru is an apprentice of the former leader of the Vicious Six, that won't happen. Furthermore, Knuckles doesn't want to see his old flame again because he knows she married another villain after all these years. The detail is that Dr. Nefario ends up overhearing the conversation between the two and tells everyone present, including the minions who also hear everything, that he is very close to the school's principal, Mrs. Ubelschlecht. This is a proven fact, since during the invasion where Gru, Poppy, and the minions try to kidnap the school's mascot, the honey badger, we see near the lever that lowers the mascot's cage a photo of Dr. Nefario and the school principal very close together. My guess would be that they are siblings or cousins. Additionally, Nefario also tells the group that the husband of Knuckles' old school flame died a year ago, trying to pull off a crime that didn't go very well. But the fact is that the Doctor manages to get an invitation for Gru through his close relationship with the principal, and he thus manages to participate in the competition, which will take place over a weekend on the school premises. Somewhat like the Wizard Tournament in Harry Potter, which makes a lot of sense since the school for supervillains resembles Hogwarts. And if you're a fan of Gru and the little yellow creatures, prove it and comment below with #Minions.
You don't love me!
Competition. Before the day of the test, Gru would undergo intense training conducted by Knuckles, who also entered the school in the same way as the boy decades ago, so he would know exactly how each of the tests that have been practiced for centuries work. Part of the movie would show this training of Gru, along with the minions who would be by the mini-boss's side to make him reach the level of villainy and evil necessary to pass the test and enter the school. After a few weeks of training, Gru would be trained and ready to face his competitors for a spot at the school for villains. On that day, we would see some characters in their teenage versions who would also be there to compete for the spot, and they would be judged by a group of school teachers, among whom would be the supervillain Knuckles was in love with. Gru's mentor then proposes to his old flame before the test begins, and she says she will only accept if Gru comes in first place among the competitors. The coolest part is that each of the competitors would have a legal guardian by their side during all the tests, with some of them even being in pairs. Of course, the one who would be with Gru would be Knuckles himself, but we would also get a chance to see Vector himself in his teenage version, with his piranha guns, accompanied by his father, Mr. Perkins. Additionally, we could also see a teenage version of Brat, who would already be a TV star with his series about the mini supervillain, accompanied by his manager, who would be on the phone the entire time. And of course, we couldn't miss Gru's future archenemy in the competition, Maxime Le Mal himself, still a teenager, accompanied by his father, who would also be a very famous villain and a fan of cockroaches, from whom his son inherited his love for insects. Besides them, there would be several other competitors with their guardians there, and Gru would need to come in first to secure his much-desired spot at LPB. At the same time, counting on the support of Knuckles, who had an extra incentive to get married to the schoolteacher, not to mention the minions, who would be infiltrated and hiding, helping Gru during the tests, just like the cockroaches would help Maxime, the little robot would help Brat, and Vector would have the support of his evil father and his semi-aquatic inventions.
Fires live piranhas. Ever seen one before? No, you haven't. I invented it.
Spot at the school. After several tests and a few days of competition, we would see that at the top of the competition would be Maxime and Gru, who would be the top contenders, mainly because the minions would sometimes help their mini-boss and other times hinder him, as they have done many times before. The final test would be a thrilling race in their flying vehicles where Gru would use a mini-vehicle built by Dr. Nefario as if it were a reduced version of the scientist's main ship, while Maxime would use a smaller version of his flying cockroach robot. And after an extremely tight race with several collisions and explosions, we would see both Gru and Maxime reaching the finish line completely charred, and both passing out and failing at the same time on the line, with everyone thinking that the winner would be Maxime. However, upon analysis by the school's supercomputer, it would be determined that Gru's long nose caused a technical tie. And meanwhile, the Council of Teachers is debating what to do, since there has never been a tie at the end of a competition to enter the school for villains. Outside, Knuckles would be listening to everything and would hear his old flame defending that Gru should get the spot at the school, making the boy's mentor proud and even more in love because he understands that she is doing this to marry him. On the other hand, Principal Ubelschlecht would argue that Maxime should be chosen. As we saw in Despicable Me 4, he has always been the favorite student of the top dog at the School of Villains. This will definitely be a difficult decision, but there is one decision that is very easy to make. Subscribe to the channel right now if you haven't already. Just click the button below.
This is brilliant.
Back to the story of the third Minions movie. When the principal was about to make the final decision, her secretary enters the meeting and announces that she has a call from the president of the High Council of Villains. She then transfers the call to the phone on her desk, and Principal Ubelschlecht, talking to the president of the Council of Villains, changes her expression and becomes very serious. When she hangs up the phone, she announces that the council has decided to intervene this time in the school's decision and determine that a technical tie should be considered, and both students should be accepted into the institution. On the other side, we see the hand of the president of the High Council of Villains hanging up the phone, and when he turns his chair around, we see that he is none other than Robert Gru, Gru's biological father. And as soon as we see him, he says to himself that he will always be watching his son. Then Drew, Gru's twin brother, enters his father's office and shows him the new weapon the blonde-haired boy built, but it ends up falling apart when he tries to use it. Then the image widens and we see that they are in Fredonia, at the family castle where there are several pigs. Gru and Maxime then receive the news and promise to meet at the start of the school year, where they will continue their rivalry as we see in Despicable Me 4. The final scene of the movie is Knuckles' wedding to his old flame, with everyone dancing once again, as always happens in the franchise's movies, to the sound of some oldies, and the two then go off on their honeymoon while Gru and the Minions prepare to go to school, where they will spend the next few years studying until they graduate in the class of '85. Thus, Minions 3 ends with everyone achieving their goals and leaving the future open for a fourth film, where we would see Gru and the Minions' life in high school. Since the movie is scheduled to premiere in early 2027, we will have lots of news to share with you here on the channel by then. In the meantime, check out our other amazing videos on the channel, like the ones appearing on your screen right now. Just click and watch.